And so, João and I have obviously spent a huge amount of time together, discussing these issues in many respects. And I know that João has a deep personal sense that there may actually be a lot of collapse in the next few years. We may see a very severe ecological meltdown and a financial meltdown. I mean, it may be that what we're seeing with the global financial system is not fixable, and therefore, the way that people exchange value is going to come into question. I guess my question for João, though, is kind of the opposite, which is, if that's like the collapse or the death of what's been known to people, what do you think is the birthing that's taking place? Do you see there's something that a new kind of consciousness that's coming into being, a new way of being, and how would you define it, and how would you use art to point people towards it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty accurate. I do think that we're at, close to an imminent collapse of both the economic system and the ecological system, the planetary ecology. And I think they're actually related. So, I mean, in the film we talk a lot about, moving away from this competition system, this competitive system, this materialist system, into more of a collaborative system. And I think that's something that is very important, is people really need to start to connect. We talk about the environment, we talk about economic issues, but there's also the people's issue. So I think one of the big things is for people to truly connect. And the internet is a great tool like that. You can connect to people all around the world, but it's also important to have the physical connection. Like Spooky was describing, when somebody starts dancing and it can become a contagious thing. I think that's essential. I think we have to move towards more communal type of lifestyle. And even in the cities, that doesn't mean like running for the hills, right? But it's like knowing your neighbors, who's next door, and it's like how many people actually talk to their neighbors. It's like you find out that, this is probably an exception in this room, but like very few, people move into the suburbs, they don't know who's there, they're isolated in their cubicles, And in many ways, I think that the next level of consciousness is for us to get out of our like self-imposed little cubicles, and move and realize that we're really all connected. That we're connected to the plant world, that we're connected to each other, and it's something that it can be done through, in many ways. I think that there are, conscious practices like yoga, meditation, and shamanism, but just planting trees, for instance, or whatever it is, teaching a class to kids, spending time, getting your community organized, to build resilient models so that we can become, that we can be ready for this change, and I would say that the change that is coming, although it's painful, and me and Daniel, I think we agree on this point, we're kind of living the birth pains of a new humanity. And there are tough things that, happen in that moment. Like when you're confronted with birth, you're also confronted with death. But after death, there is a rebirth. And I think we're living that moment. And although it might seem like sometimes, there's a lot of doom and gloom and, apocalyptic stories, but at the same time, the crisis is an opportunity for us to really connect and make that step towards, a new world, a more keeping the diversity. I'm not for I think all one. I think it's important to have cultural diversity, to respect different cultures, to acknowledge them, to respect countries' sovereignties, not try to invade every country and dictate and impose this imperialist model everywhere in the world for whatever reasons, respect diversity. Yeah, well, some people say we should just be, go into hedonistic alienation, but let's not get off topic here. Yeah, but that's that, so I think that we can move towards this collaborative model, and so Daniel, maybe I can ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah, so, we met about 3 years ago, and I think you had a certain vision about 2012 and what it represented. Like, by talking to all this, 200 people we interviewed for the process of making a movie, how did that perspective change, and how do you see it now, and what does it mean to you today?
I wrote a book called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, and I looked at, my own experiences with psychedelic shamanism in the Amazon and West Africa, which had opened me to realizing that, as much as there is a physical and material world, there's also these other psychic and spiritual dimensions of reality that modern society has tended to negate and neglect. When I wrote the book, it was very philosophical. I looked at a lot of thinkers and thought very, deeply, but also kind of abstractly about how this change might be a transformation in the way we perceive time, or a paradigm shift in integrating the mystical wisdom of Eastern cultures and indigenous people with our modern scientific framework. So none of that has really changed. Like, I still think that that's all the case. And I also never said in the book that it was definitely going to be like at any moment in particular, this huge transformation. I think we're in the hinge of a transformation. And I think that if your eyes are open to it and your ears are open to it, that's becoming more and more evident. I guess what I learned from the process of doing the film is more tangibly and practically, how this change could come about in terms of human society, through integrating things like the Buckminster Fuller ideas, and then also one idea which we talk about in the film is how to make a systematic change in the monetary system, because at the moment we have money is controlled, is monopolized. The mechanisms for exchanging value are monopolized by private financial interests who basically rig the system so that an enormous amount of the wealth is funneled to a very small class of the financial elite speculators. And that is clearly not a system that's going to be sustainable. So we talk in the movie with Bernard Lietaer, who has different ideas for how new instruments for exchanging value could be created that would augment that would change how society operates, that would allow for more collaborative society. So there's a whole number of things like that, more specific, kind of implementation. I mean, another thing that I've been doing in parallel is I started a web magazine called Reality Sandwich, and we have a social network which is called evolver.net. And through Evolver, we have launched what we're calling the Evolver Social Movement. And we now have about 35 groups in the US and abroad, in places like Cape Town, South Africa, and Australia, and England, and Hungary, who meet together every month in conscious gatherings.
Also in Chicago, right?
And Chicago, exactly. We probably have some of the Evolver people here. In Los Angeles, Chicago, New Orleans. And really the idea is to do consciousness raising, help people to see these solution-based approaches, and then actually to implement them. So in Atlanta, there's a group that's now doing permaculture together and creating a healing center. And actually in New Orleans last weekend, the Evolver group led a whole effort to collect hair from this nonprofit and then make these meshes out of it and put it in the ocean, because hair is apparently the best way to contain oil. So we're very interested in moving from the theory to the practice, and the film has been part of that evolution and that journey for me, and hopefully it's also going to work as a movement builder for what we're doing.